Welcome to the Becoming Ronin podcast. Today we have an absolute legend on the podcast, Steve Maxwell, one of my mentors for over 20 years. Steve has been in the industry for over 50 years, and he's the world's first American Jiu-Jitsu black belt under the Gracie system. And he had the first school back in the early 80s in Philadelphia. And Steve is going to talk to us about his daily routines, how to not get injured in Jiu-Jitsu, why isometrics are so important in your training, not only as a young athlete, but also as you move through your fitness journey.
The guy is so far ahead of the game when it comes to training principles.
Unbelievable. And he's so versed. He can take you through a mobility workout, a strength training program. He could teach you the basics of jiu-jitsu. It's just so versed.
And you got to listen to a guy who's been training for 70 years with no injuries. The guy's a picture of health. And the guy moves like he's 20 years old. So you got to go to those guys when it comes to training longevity advice, you know?
Yeah, you're trying to learn from people who've been before you. And again, Steve is one of my mentors and someone I've looked up to for many years. So I know you're going to love this podcast. Obi and I got so much out of it, and we hope you enjoy.
Awesome.
Well,
go ahead.
Obi and I were just talking. Last time you were on was episode 12. Is that
19? It was 2 years ago.
Oh,
years ago.
Yeah.
That was quick.
Yeah.
Too long, guys.
Yeah.
How's everything going? What's the latest?
Good. During the pandemic, I pulled off the road for my travels, and I was living in Port Townsend, Washington State, way out in the Olympic Peninsula.
Wow.
But since that time now, I've moved to South Carolina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, probably about 6 months ago.
Wow.
I'm just across the state line from Savannah, Georgia. It's what they call the Low Country in South Carolina. South Carolina Low Country. Actually quite nice. How's
the weather there right now?
Well, actually, it's funny. It's not that warm.
Huh.
It's like 60 degrees.
Oh, wow.
So
that's that warm.
Yeah.
That's pretty warm.
Saturday will be 71, Sunday 73.
You poor souls.
So not too bad.
No, not at all.
We did have like a little chilly. It was pretty chilly for down here. I mean, 30s at night and high 40s during the day, which is down here.
So are you still out on the road doing seminars? Are you still traveling?
No. I do everything via Zoom. I do online personal clients. So I basically do like, personal training via FaceTime or WhatsApp or Zoom.
Nice. Is that just, you're trying to settle down into one spot and then work out there?
Yeah, pretty much. The traveling days kind of ended with the COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've been going to jiu-jitsu quite a bit. It's a hotbed of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu down here. And I'm a 6th degree black belt, so I'm one of the early practitioners of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm pretty much due for a coral belt very soon.
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah.
What's the criteria for that? Is it just time or?
Yeah, time and still being active. I mean, you got to still be active in the game, and I am. I teach at one school in Savannah, and then I fill in for the instructor at this other one near Hilton Head, South Carolina.
Wow!
So,
yeah, it's fantastic. We were just talking about that before the podcast because I don't know if you know, but I started jiu-jitsu about a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I always bring you up and talk about how, you've been an inspiration for me for 20 years. And one of the things Obi and I were talking about was as you kind of navigate jiu-jitsu as maybe someone just coming into jiu-jitsu, or you're someone that's been in the game training and in the lifestyle for so many years, how do you stay injury free? Like, what are some of the tips that you might suggest to people if they're interested?
Yeah, I mean, Are we on? Are we on live now? Or
Yes,
Yep, we're on.
okay, yeah, we're recording. Okay, well, good, because we don't want to waste these gems, you know.
No,
No, sir.
especially this guy. He needs every bit of advice on staying injury free.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, you know, I'm 71 now, so I'm not a kid. I've been grappling since 1964 when I started wrestling in the Carlisle area school system, and I went on and became a PE major at Westchester State College. Now it's a university, but it was a state teachers college at the time. And I majored in health and PE, and I wrestled 4 years NCAA Division One. That was the big boy program, and you know, we had some pretty tough schedule, and I was very successful. I wasn't a good tournament guy though. I was very good dual meet, but I always seemed to burn out towards the end of the year, and I wish I knew then what I know now. Mostly it was due to overtraining, pushing myself too hard, and I was cutting weight pretty bad. Had I to do it all over again, I would not have cut the weight, and I wouldn't have trained quite as much, quite as often. But then, you know, I was looking for what can I do after I graduated. I was teaching high school, coaching wrestling, you know, but wrestling is a young man's sport. And, you know, what do you do with yourself and all that energy that used to go into wrestling? So I started dabbling in martial arts, you know, a little Muay Thai, a little Bondo, a little karate, you know, some Kempo karate, some Kung Fu even. But I didn't really find anything I liked until I discovered a Russian Sambo teacher in Northeast Philadelphia, and I really liked that. But it's kind of tough making the practices. You know, rush hour, I-95 in Philadelphia. What should have been like a 15-minute drive ended up being like an hour in traffic. So that didn't last too long. And then I discovered the Gracie brothers, and I started training around 89. I went to the first seminar on the East Coast and fell in love with it. So I set up my own little area. I had just opened up my gym exercise, and I had space, and I got mats, and I just started practicing what I had learned from the seminar and their videotapes. And then I started making trips out to California, back and forth and back and forth. And being an ex-wrestler, I knew how to organize practice, I knew how to train, and I got a pretty good group of guys together. And by this time, people were starting to take notice of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Orion had made his Gracie Challenge in Playboy magazine. I think that was like 88 or whatever. And so people knew about it, but not like after the UFC. So that was the beginnings, you know. And then because of my wrestling background, I made purple belt pretty quick.
Wow.
About a year and a half, actually. That's pretty fast for a purple belt. I got my blue belt in about 6 months and purple belt in about a year and a half. And then I stayed. I reached the level of my incompetence. I had that wrestler jiu-jitsu going on. And during that time, I started when I was 38, by the way. So not a young guy, but not an old guy either. But made a lot of mistakes. One, you know, you were asking, this was a long-winded way of kind of segging into what I wanted to talk about. One of the big mistakes I was making was I was very stubborn. I didn't want to tap. And I would just really bleed from the eyes not to tap, especially to someone of a lower rank.
Yeah.
Big mistake. So my advice now is tap early, tap often. Do not be afraid to tap. Put the ego away. You know, it's not a contest. It's not a tournament. It's just a practice. So if you get caught, you get caught. You made a mistake. The second thing, when you get in a submission hold of any type, do not try to fight out. That's not technique. The technique is not getting into it in the first place.
Wow, that's good.
So you get caught in an arm lock or you know, knee lock or some type of strangle, guillotine, whatever, you know, Darce. Fighting out of it is not a technique. I mean, there are techniques to evade, but for the most part, if the guy really knows what he's doing, you're done. So I always imagine number one is Rickson Gracie. And if they get me in it, even if I can feel it's not completely applied correctly, I just don't take the chance. And I figure, well, if it was Rickson or Hoyce or I'd be tapping. So why not just tap and acknowledge the fact that A, I made a mistake. I shouldn't even be in this position. That will preserve your limbs a lot, your neck, your back, your shoulders. Second, don't let anyone stack you up on your neck. Some guys play guard, they're pretty flexible, and maybe they have a triangle or an arm lock, or maybe someone's just passing the guard. And once again, they'll just fight to the last breath not to have the guard pass or to release that triangle, even though some big guys jacking them up on their neck or their spine. I can't tell you how many guys I see walking around that are crippled up with terrible back pain. Even Horion and Rickson have some really bad back issues. I talked to Horion Gracie. Horion Gracie's oldest son. He runs the Gracie Combatives program out in California. They have the Gracie University out there. Anyway, we were talking about this. And he's still a young guy, but he said, I never let anyone stack me up. He said, I just let him pass my guard. He said, screw it. We don't play that point game. I don't care. He said, I'm so confident in my self-defense, my defense from the bottom, cross side, or even the mount. I don't care. I'm not going to ruin my health by allowing people to stack me up on my cervical spine. But you see it every day in class.
Yeah.
So that's the third. Tap early, tap often. Don't be afraid to tap to people of the lower rank. Don't let people jack you up in your neck. Don't overtrain. Don't think you're going to do a bodybuilding, powerlifting, CrossFit, Olympic lifting, in the hood type workout and do jiu-jitsu at the same time. I always like to say jiu-jitsu is a harsh mistress. She does not tolerate other women in your life. She's jealous, man. So you only have but so much energy. And because it's a high technique sport, you need to spend the majority of your time on the mat. Not in the gym, not in the weight room. It's not about muscles and strength, it's about technique. Now, that being said, you still want to be as absolutely strong as you can possibly be, but you don't want to spend a whole hell of a lot of time doing it because you need to be on the mat. So what does that mean? Well, I went back to a former type of training I used to do. I'm sure you've all heard of Mike Mentzer and heavy duty.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
And you've heard of Arthur Jones and high intensity training, that whole crew. Well, that's a very good model for jiu-jitsu guys. Brief and frequent training done in a high intensity manner. Basically single set, momentary failure, get it done, and get out of the gym. You're not going to build an appreciable amount of muscle when you're doing BJJ. Okay, I know there's always the exception to the rule. Someone's going to point out, yeah, but look at Gordon Ryan and look at this guy. These guys are the exception. They're the exception. Yes, there are some guys with unbelievable physiques. There are a few guys here and there that have managed to build muscle while doing jiu-jitsu. But once again, they're few and far between. They're not mere mortals like me with average genetics. No way. So you can just beat yourself up a lot trying to combine too much bodybuilding in the gym or too much powerlifting or whatever and trying to add it to your jiu-jitsu. The other thing that I was unaware of, this is the fifth thing, wear and tear is a real thing. That's the other problem with adding gym work to jiu-jitsu work. There's wear and tear in the joints in everything you do, every game you play, all activities, and it is real, and your joints do wear out over time. So you try to prevent that erosion by not doing too much volume. That's another reason why I started adopting the more high intensity approach to my training again. And I'll talk about this in a while, but I started doing isometrics as opposed to even positive, negative type movement patterns. Well, I'll talk about isometrics in a minute. But the idea is that you want to preserve, you want to be as big and strong as possible, but at the same time, you want to use as little energy as possible. When you're rolling, try to use about 60% of your energy. Every now and again, of course, you have to up the ante a little bit. As House and Grace used to say, put a little spice in the stew. But for the most part, you try to be relaxed, use as little energy as possible, and just avoid going to the gym too often. I know some young guys train every day, twice a day. You'll hear people, even in this podcast and comments, oh, I train every day, But try that when you're 60 or 70. If you even last that long. By the way, the big quitting age for jiu-jitsu is about purple belt. It's when people quit. Yeah, and it's interesting because purple belt's a big belt. It takes a long time to get to a belt, and you're getting pretty darn good by the time you're a purple belt. The problem is a lot of guys spend a lot of time doing it. They're already beginning to get burnt out. They're already beginning to, suffer joint problems. Many of them at this point have their careers expand, or they get married, or they have kids, or job changes, and they can't devote the time to it anymore. That's one reason. The other reason is this burnout, man. Getting purple belt, it's not easy. You got to work hard. That's a big delineation. Pretty much anyone can get the blue belt, but getting from blue to purple, you got to be pretty dedicated. And once you get that purple, you're kind of like almost like a semi-pro at that point. So
yeah, I actually have a question on that point. Not to cut you off, but when it comes,
I've been rattling on here.
there's so many good points here, but this one kind of applies to at least my jiu-jitsu career so far, which is that I've recognized with my own practice, it is so hard to make progress without being ultra consistent. Now, the byproduct of being ultra consistent in jiu-jitsu is definitely burnout, and I feel like a lot of people in the fitness industry do it for the love of the game, the lifting, the powerlifting, the bodybuilding, the jiu-jitsu. How do you balance, with your own students and your own athletes? Do you have recommendations for the people who are coming to you of like taking time off? Are you recommending consistency over, maybe spreading out their jiu-jitsu career and recognizing that, you need to focus on the long game? What does that look like in terms of your tutelage, your advice to your own students?
Well, it does change as you get older, obviously. Young men can withstand a lot more work than older guys. But for the most part, you have to decide what's more important to you. Your bodybuilding or powerlifting or your jiu-jitsu. That's one thing. I mean, you can combine the two. But here's the thing. Powerlifting is a sport. And it's not necessarily the best way to build strength for other sports. It's not. You can get strong as shit lifting heavy weight. But as you know, that's high skill work. High skill. I'll give an example. I had a Japanese guy come into my school at Max's house. I had the first BJJ school on the East Coast. This is before anybody else. Way before Renzo Gracie or anybody on the East Coast. No one even in New York. It was just me and Philly. And I had this Japanese guy come into my school. And this guy was unbelievable. He was a savage. Very small guy. Probably weighed about 162 pounds soaking wet. And we were working for the U.S. Nationals, I believe, at the time, or maybe it was the Pan Ams. But anyway, we were doing a lot of takedown work. And this guy was throwing the heck out of everyone. He put the white belt on. He barely spoke English. And I'm thinking, this guy's no white belt. Who the hell is this guy? And I mean, he's smashing everybody. A little tiny Japanese guy. So I get to talking to him afterwards. It turns out that the guy's a 3-time world Greco-Roman wrestling champion from Japan. He was also Tokai University judo coach. He was a fourth degree black belt in judo. He also won All Japan Championship. And he was also one of the judges on the old Pride fights, the old Pride.
Wow.
Yeah, so this guy was even at a fan club. His name is Yasushi Miyake. Now, on the mat, he felt like an absolute savage, like one of the strongest little guys I ever grappled with. His underhooks were sick. It was interesting because he said that he didn't rely on the grips like you do in judo. He relied more on body holds, like in wrestling. But man, once he got a hold of you, woo, you were going for a ride. And despite how strong he felt, we were lifting weights afterwards. And the guy was weak as a girl when it came to lifting. He did not have the technique. He didn't know how to deadlift, didn't know how to bench. You know, he was using like 12-kilogram kettlebells. He had no technique. Now, did that mean he was weak? No, he just didn't have the skill. So I asked him, how did you get so strong? What was your workout? He said, I used to do pull-ups. I used to use a towel on the pull-up bar for specific grip. A lot of times he would climb a rope. I said, what did you do, for your pushing method? He would do push-ups. He would do those real wide leg Japanese push-ups that kind of look like Hindu push-ups, but with a wide leg. He said that he would do ab work by hanging on the heavy bag like a guard, doing guard sit-ups. I asked him what he did for his legs. He carried his training partner up and down the steep flight of stairs.
Wow.
I mean, the crudest, simplest work, but not heavyweight. A lot of strength endurance stuff. But I'm telling you, this guy was strong. Crazy strong. Oh, wow. He would do the typical wrestler bridge stuff, He'd do a couple other things, but for the most part, it was very simple, very crude, non-equipment, minimalist kind of strength workout. And then he told me that he would do 100 fit-in throws. They call it uchikomi. Like he would practice his favorite throw like 100 times. That is some serious conditioning, man. And they would use crash pads,
Yeah.
Using your partner. So maybe he'd do like 100 throws with his partner. That's a lot of strength and endurance too. So the point is, he couldn't lift weights for shit. Did that mean he's weak? Not at all. And I've had the reverse happen. I've had powerlifters come in to my gym back in the day, and they felt relatively weak because they weren't able to transfer that bench press strength or that squat strength or that deadlift strength to the mat. It was non-transferable because they used a style of powerlifting that was so specific. A lot of the sumo lifters, for example, it doesn't really translate to jiu-jitsu or any sport for that matter. Or, the guys that are doing that real arch back benching, I mean, so arched, the bar's moving like 3 inches off their massive chest. You've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you can lift a lot of heavy weight that way. Is that the best way to train for sport? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So that's my point.
Yeah.
You can be strong in weight lifting, but not necessarily able to transfer it all that well. Now, obviously, anything you do is going to make you stronger. And we know it all works. Olympic lifting works, powerlifting works, in the hood works, gymnastics, where it all works. But you're looking to minimize the wear and tear. And you don't want to be spending all your time, chasing big weights, unless that's your goal.
Right.
I mean, maybe powerlifting is more important to some young guys out there than jiu-jitsu. They're just adding jiu-jitsu on as like a little hobby, and their main sport is lifting heavy weight.
Yeah. Well, everyone feels weak when they're tired. So powerlifting being a 7-second lift is not going to translate to a 5-minute round. Do you have something I was going to ask a question, but if you have.
Yeah, I was just, I have 1,000 questions. So you mentioned Menser. Back in the day, you were overtraining. You were, probably lifting a ton of weights and doing a lot of jiu-jitsu practice. And you mentioned Menser as sort of someone that you like that style of getting in and out of the gym. And I know that like over time, where you used to be a proponent of kettlebell stuff,
Correct.
and now not so much. what are some of the things, like as far as training? So minimize training, few main lifts, taking them to failure, sort of that hit style. But what are some of like the other things that maybe you stay away from?
Well, one of the things I discovered was that all the momentum type lifts,
mm,
power cleans, Olympic barbell snatches, uh, or even endurance work like kettlebell swings, kettlebell snatches, it really does put a lot of stress in the joints over time,
right.
especially if you're coupling that with jiu-jitsu practice and training. And I was feeling my shoulder in particular wearing out. I was really having some arthritic problems with the shoulder, and I was diagnosed with some osteoarthritis in the right shoulder. It didn't feel good, I felt
Mm-hmm.
damn near injured, and I was using good technique. But I mean, think of it this way: if people that play a lot of tennis, they're just swinging a tennis racket, right? Doesn't even weigh what, a pound maybe, and they get tennis elbow, or swimmers that do a lot of freestyle or butterfly, end up with swimmer's shoulder. Look at Tiger Woods. A couple major surgeries on his back. He's just swinging a damn golf club. What do people think's going to happen when you start throwing a 24-kilogram kettlebell over your head for 100 reps? You're going to
Right.
get some serious wear and tear. That was one. The high repetition nature doesn't toughen your joints; it erodes your joints. But number two, I believed all that hype that you got to move fast to be fast. That in order to recruit fast twitch muscle fiber, you need to be fast and explosive. Not true. For example, they've shown in studies that isometrics recruit fast twitch muscle fiber better than anything. You're not moving at all. You want to get fast and explosive, start doing isometric. You'll get very explosive. A lot of martial artists realize this even a long time ago. Bruce Lee was a huge proponent of isometrics. There was a very famous wrestler back in the 40s and 50s, Henry Wittenberg, big proponent of isometrics and simple strength training. So I think it is important to strength train. You definitely should be lifting some type of weight, even if it's just your body weight. You know, you you can do chins, dips, push-ups, body weight rows. You can do really slow, high tension body weight squats and lunges, various types of abdominal work, uh, back extensions, either isometrically on the floor or off a 45-degree back extension bench, and be as strong as you're ever genetically capable of being. Now, does that mean you're going to go in there and knock out a 300-pound bench press? No, you got to practice that to be good at that. But it doesn't ultimately matter as long as you're taxing your muscles hard, brief, and frequent. My workouts now take about 20 minutes, and I primarily use body weight and isometrics. Is it hard? You damn better believe it's hard. And I usually train like once a week now in my 70s with strength training. Now I do mobility and stretching every day. I get in the mat 4 days a week, and I'll grapple hard twice a week. 2 other days is more like a lot of times I'm teaching, so I'll drill, and I get a chance to practice the technique by repeatedly showing the technique over and over and over again. So I keep it in my nervous system.
Well, Obi and I were actually just talking about difference between maximal effort work and dynamic effort work. And what most people don't realize, if you look at the force velocity curve, right, and you take max effort work to the extreme, it becomes an isometric, right?
Pretty
And
much.
yeah, so my question to
It's
you
only
is,
isometric in the end.
Yeah.
yeah, so how are you using the isometrics? Are you we are all familiar with like strength training patterns. Are you getting into a certain position in a pattern, let's say a squat, like halfway down and then holding that position?
I
Or
use
how?
a method called the time static contraction method. I actually kind of came up with this a long time ago, and then the guy that did Super Slow, Ken Hutchins, he
Mhm.
took it and ran with it. He called it super statics, and then the actual methodology is called time static contraction, and it's a prolonged isometric. And each isometric has a built-in warm-up. By the way, I was doing isometrics back at Carlisle High School back in the 60s. Remember the old York Power racks?
Yes, sir.
They weren't made for powerlifting in those days. They were made for isometrics. And basically the idea was you put a bar at one level on a pin, and then there'd be another pin, like a long above it, and then you would lift the weight and hold it against the pin for time. But they were very short duration isometric, like 6 to 10 seconds. And then they made like a little portable isometric thing. My dad bought me one for my birthday, I remember. And it was basically just a chain and a stick on a little board. And you would do like isometric holds in 3 positions. What they had found was in those days, you only got strong at the angle that you were contracting. So you would do 3 different angles, more like an extension, more like mid-range, and then more like the extended angle. Like a curl, your arms would be almost straight. The second set would be halfway bent. The third would be almost in a position of full contraction. So you do 3 different positions, 6 to 10 seconds.
You're like in a deadlift, right?
Yeah, like deadlift. You would do 3 different positions, overhead press, 3 different positions. You could do simple exercises like curls or whatever, but you could also do like compound movements like rows and presses, deadlifts, squats, and so forth. Anyway, to make a long story short, it was discovered that by doing prolonged holds in the mid-range, the weakest range of most compound movements, that would be like halfway up in a chin-up, halfway down in a squat, the bar about knee height in the deadlift. When you hold that up to 90 seconds, holy shit, you recruit all the available muscle fiber. And you get strong throughout the full range of motion. And you pick the mid-range because it's the weakest part of the range. It doesn't make sense to strengthen the strongest. For example, in a squat, you take even an average person, they can hold a lot of weight near the top of a squat. The average person could probably easily hold over 500 pounds. But you put a mid-range, wow. You hold a squat mid-range, pushing up against a static strap or whatever, my God, that's really hard. And what they found, Ken Hutchins and other people that practice this, was that people would still get full range results throughout the full range, even though you were working mid-range. And the protocol was 30 seconds at 50% effort. That was your warm-up. So each isometric had a built-in warm-up. The second 30 seconds, and they would run concurrently, you want to take a break, was at 75% effort. Now you're pushing a little bit harder. That would be like the middle reps of a set, like you're doing a set of chins, and you're getting like up near your max, it starts to get a little hard. And then the last 30 seconds will be as hard as you dare. Not necessarily as hard as you can. Now, if you're feeling a little tweak or a little joint thing, you back off it. If you're feeling good, you go all out. And here's the interesting thing. I was doing these with a force gauge. There was a little thing called a tin deck. And I made my own little apparatus. And it was basically it kind of looked like a bodyweight rowing with adjustable straps. And I would attach that to this tin deck. And via Bluetooth, I could watch my strength curve in real time on my iPad. And from 0, like 50% effort, right? From 0 to 30 seconds, that line would shoot straight up. And then when I started applying 75%, the line would kind of plateau. And when I went 100%, that line started going down, meaning that I was eroding my muscular strength. I was making inroads. The muscle was getting more and more and more fatigued. Towards the end, it went right down. I could barely create any more force. That was it.
But the intention was as much as you can on that last 30 seconds.
I was going all out.
Yeah.
It's really important to breathe. And I find that this is really nice because there's no mechanical stress. It's all metabolic stress. So it's really good for jiu-jitsu guys. I'll tell you who's using a lot of isometrics is Gordon Bryant. Yeah, he's big into it.
Well, it's interesting. We do talk a lot about isometrics in our training, and a lot of the protocols I used early on when we were talking about strength was from Mel Siff, and he talked about how when you engage in an isometric, there should be this rise and attack. And the rise and attack would mean the first effort into the isometric should be a lower energy or lower intensity so you can accumulate the tension and all the muscles that you're trying to work. And then as that accumulation occurs and you're engaging all the muscles, then it rises up to your greatest effort. But to your point, when we're talking about strength or pre-fatigue or performing anything pre or post to some type of lifting, it was typically 5 to 10 seconds, right? When you're pushing the 90-second barrier, that's I think that's so beneficial. I actually talk a lot about isometrics in my Aceless Athlete program. You remember when we did our DVD together, Aceless Athlete? Well, I went and I wrote a book around that, and I expanded all those concepts. But I think as you progress through your strength training lifetime, isometrics will play a greater and greater role. When you say,
well, it's definitely good for old guys with achy joints. And I've worked
for sure.
a lot of elders, like my wife's mom was in her 80s, mid 80s, and she had fallen and broken her wrist. She used to do an exercise class, but she couldn't because she had a broken wrist. And I trained her for about 6 months with these isometrics, and she made great progress. And interestingly enough, because her class was like an old people's class, she wasn't really pushing herself. But with isometrics, she did, and she actually hypertrophied.
Wow.
I mean, measurable hypertrophy. When last time you saw an 84-year-old lady put like a quarter inch in her arm? I mean, quarter inch is
There's hope for you, Smitty.
Yeah, I'm going to come stay with you for a while. I'm trying to get those gains.
So, they're very good for pain too. If you have achy joints, it's almost like rehabilitative. You could definitely rehabilitate anyone using this form of time static contraction.
Well,
but it's not all that new. I mean, think of the great Russian strongman Alexander Zaz. A lot of people call him the father of modern isometrics. That guy was using isometrics, way back in the day in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and built prodigious strength and power doing primarily isometric training. And
was he doing the chain work that you were talking about, where you stand on
he was doing chains. When he was a kid, he didn't even have metal or anything. He would go in the forest and bend little saplings and trees, and
bend the sapling and hold it in that bent position.
Bend it and hold it from various positions, all these different angles and everything. Another guy that was pretty big in isometrics was the guy, the strongman Steve Justa. He did some kind of interesting isometric work. He would do isometrics on various farm implements around, and
well, it's not necessarily new, but I think what you're bringing up hasn't made it into the mainstream, where I think people maybe implement them in terms of a rehab standpoint or some accessory volume, but I don't think people recognize the benefit of the power development, like you're saying, because while the science is there, like we talked about in one of our power episodes, that the time under tension needs to be enough to yield a nervous system input enough to recruit the high threshold motor units. So it makes sense. I like what you're saying about minimizing momentum while simultaneously increasing the time under tension. And it makes total sense of why that would be beneficial for power development. But I think a lot of people are afraid of isometrics in terms of replacing those power exercises because they haven't yet made that connection.
Well, here's the thing. The only people that should really be concerned about how much weight they're lifting are people that compete in weightlifting. But who cares?
Yeah.
Like I told you about the little Japanese guy. He couldn't lift weights for anything. But, oh my God, this guy was just incredibly strong with the simplest, crudest program. Basically, what it really boils down to is anything that taxes your muscles and make you work really hard, as long as you're getting good nutrition and plenty of sleep and recovery, you're going to get stronger. But here's what differentiates most programs. Because, like I said, it all works. No one's going to argue that. It's the wear and tear over a lifetime. And I'm trying to minimize that, especially now. Because, I've had my fair share of wear and tear. So now I want to minimize that wear and tear. Because I would like to continue doing jiu-jitsu into my 80s. I'd like to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the early on when we first met, one of the things you taught me was the spinal wave. Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So I actually videoed it, but I remember you telling me about your back injury, a spondylolisthesis. Is that?
Spondylolisthesis.
Yeah. And basically the spinal wave was setting up in a 45-degree back raise and kind of doing a crunch so that you round your back forward, and then you, by each segment of the spine, you extend each segment of the spine until you're fully straight up and down, and you're isometrically contracting your entire posterior chain. Do you still do exercises like that? And I was just thinking about that because you were talking about longevity and movement and minimizing momentum, but there's also a suppleness to jiu-jitsu that requires, power lifters coming in and doing jiu-jitsu have a different experience than maybe a gymnastic. Someone's in gymnastics, they have a suppleness.
Well, I still do a lot of Qi Gong. That's something I started adding after visiting China a couple of times. I saw the suppleness of a lot of the elderly people. It was pretty amazing. I started practicing some of the energetic forms in Qigong. And the problem with Chinese Qigong is they don't pay attention to strength and muscle. So,
what is Qigong, like Tai Chi?
Yeah, similar. It's like a medicinal type exercise. It's similar to Tai Chi, but there's probably about 30 different types of Qigong. But you're working with your energy body. But they don't work with the meat body. You got to do both, man. So I'll still do those Russian Slavic exercises that I learned that they use in Sistema and Russian Sambo. I like those moves. There's a lot of BJJ specific drills and patterns. Hickson Gracie was famous for doing a lot of these things. So I'll do those on a daily basis. At least 15, 20 minutes minimum, sometimes longer. One strength training a week usually is all I have energy for. And then I get in the mat 4 days a week. 2 days is more drill oriented. And 2 days I'll actually train. But not
So,
70, so a younger guy.
In terms of training, well, just to put a bow on what you said before about, specific strength to BJJ, there's nothing that will make you realize your strength has failed you in all your strength training and powerlifting as going into a BJJ gym for the first time and rolling with a guy who's 130 pounds and can do whatever he wants and hold you down. I mean, I had no delusions that I, could do anything against a black belt, but it is incredible to see how little that strength transfers over. And that brings me to my next question, which is, in strength training, there's a phrase to build your strength, not consistently test it. A lot of guys going to the gym, especially younger lifters, they'll go and every single time they lift, it turns into a max effort, session where they're constantly trying to test their bench press and their squat and their deadlift. And I've wondered, similarly, training at different gyms in the country, jiu-jitsu, I can see there's a different interpretation on how intense they train. So I'll go to some gyms and they pretty much just live roll with very little attention to technique. And in contrast, our gym, where Spinney and I train, tons of really in-depth attention to technique and flows and concepts. And when you say training on the mats, are you going, I know you said about 60%. Are there times where you are going all out in your sparring, or is pretty much all of your training moderate?
Okay. When I say training, training is like 3 different phases in jiu-jitsu. There's drilling. You know the old saying, drillers make killers.
Mm-hmm.
You got to drill. No one likes to drill, but you got to repeat the move over and over again. Then you have resisted drilling, where now your partner is giving you a little hard time. Maybe not all out, but he's basically making life difficult. So now you have to do the drills against the resisting opponent, but only partial resistance. Then there's situational grappling, where you'll pick a particular position on that day and just keep working from there and then go live. Maybe you'll keep going after you get out of the position, but you go back to the position. And then there's free sparring, where you just both start neutral on your feet or on your knees. You need all 4 of those to get really good. All 4. And when I say 60%, you want to try to only use 60% of your strength at all times. But there'll be times where the guy's better than you, faster than you, stronger than you, and you may have to use a little bit more. And that's the good thing about being as strong as possible, because 60% of a really strong man's effort might be 100% of mine.
Turns out Smitty's 60% is 100%.
It would be 100% of mine too.
So
technique will only take you so far. You need all of it, the whole shebang. And it also depends the kind of gym you're in. A lot of gyms like competition. I'm in a more self-defense oriented gym.
Yeah.
And back to isometrics, by the way. There's 2 types of isometrics. There's yielding and overcoming isometrics. The yielding, you're using a measurable weight for time. And you just go until you can't hold it. And then the overcoming is you're pushing against a strap, a chain, or some immovable object where there's no possibility of moving it at all. And it's good to include both. A classic example that they use in a lot of fitness classes would be the wall sit or wall seat, some people call it, or in martial arts, the horse stance for time. That's, a lot of karate striking styles, they hold horse stances. Freaking brutal, man. Or you can go halfway down in a push-up and just hold it for time, like the mid-range. You can get an unbelievable workout doing that. You could get into the power cage and lift a barbell up against the pin and hold it there for time. And as soon as you make a certain time, you could increase the weight for the next time. So that's another way you could do it, with a barbell against the pin. You could be rowing, overhead press, incline press, bench press, whatever. A squat, a deadlift, you hold it against the pin in the mid-range, and you can give yourself, that way at least you know exactly how much effort you're putting into it.
So I'll go ahead, Smitty.
Well, I was just going to ask about one of the things that I've seen in our school, and I've gone to another school, is where someone who lifts or someone who strength trains, they'll come in and we ask them to do a drill or a technique. And when they start utilizing their strength more than technique, because that's what they feel comfortable with, because they come from a strength training background, they'll hold their breath to get the effort out. Right. Yeah. Let's say they're bridging or they're trying to get their hooks in or whatever. They're trying to get off their back. They'll take a big breath, hold it, and then, max effort trying to move, when that's sort of the opposite of what you should be doing with jiu-jitsu. You should be breathing and constantly breathing. Can you talk a little bit about that? How people...
Well, that brings me back to isometrics again, because if you think about it, isometrics are, grappling is basically a whole series of isometric holds.
Wow.
Flow, hold, isometric, flow, hold, isometric. And if you hold your breath, you'll get really exhausted. And it can be dangerous because you really spike your blood pressure when you hold your breath during isometrics. So isometrics in the gym teach you to breathe in jiu-jitsu. And the breathing technique is, I'll hold the camera close to my face. but you breathe in through the nose. It's like continuous little short breath. And sometimes it's like that. And sometimes you'd hear, like when you have a lot of pressure in your chest, you leave the air out in a little burst. Like, so there's all these different breathing techniques that people use. I used to think that Hoist was making fun of me, when you do that kind of stuff. I used to think he was like teasing me or making fun of me because it sounded so freaking weird when you were doing stuff. Then I understood it later, Once he taught me about the breath component. But yeah, breath control is really important. But that's another reason I like isometrics, because it teaches you to breathe while under tension. And the worst thing you can do is hold your breath. A lot of guys will say, "Oh my God, I'm so out of shape." They'll be, bah, bah. It's like, no, dude, you just have to learn how to breathe, man.
Right.
Yeah.
You're in great shape. You just have to learn how to conserve your breath. You're basically exhausting yourself by robbing yourself of oxygen, man.
Well, you have a whole series on breathing on your website. You have all these programs that people can purchase that go deeper into all these aspects we're talking about. And the breathing was something that was very unique and something I've always kind of looked into. But have you looked at all these things with the mouth taping? Have you gone into any of that research or any?
Yeah. No, I studied the Buteyko breathing system, and I tape my mouth every night. I think it's really, really good. A lot of people that have had nose damage, a lot of fighters have had deviated septum from getting busted in the nose or broken nose. It's really important to make sure that you do not mouth breathe at night. You want to get that tape over the mouth. Make sure your mouth is sealed, so you're forced to nasal breathe, especially when you're sleeping. But yeah, I use that. I do various breathing exercises, but the most important thing is don't hold your breath.
Yeah.
Short little breaths. I mean, it doesn't have to be real complex.
Yeah.
Some people make it really more complicated than it needs. You don't need Wim Hof or any of that stuff, You just need some. Wim Hof works, but it's more to endure cold. It's not the best way to do jiu-jitsu.
When you're talking about isometrics and you were referencing the research, you said 90 seconds. Does your training isometrics pretty much look like you're mimicking the research, or are you still doing slow eccentrics, slow concentrics? Are you doing any barbell work or any concentric work?
I make it up sometimes,
Yeah.
I still like to do really slow chin. 10 seconds up, 2-second hold, 10 seconds down. Sometimes I like to go 30 seconds up. 30-second hold, 30. Try that sometime, man. Brutal. I like that slow, high tension training because it teaches you to breathe under tension.
Yeah.
And it's really good for old man joints. And a lot of people say, "Oh, you can't hypertrophy." That's bullshit. You can. I've started plenty of beginners on this type of training. Of course, once you've been training for about 5 years, you're not going to see a whole lot of gains anymore after,
Yeah.
pretty, here and there. Maybe if you stop training for a while, you'll see like a little bump up and whatever. But for the most part, after 5 years, what you see is what you get. And then you're just trying to hold on to what you built.
Right.
Over the lifetime. That's what the situation I'm in. I just like to try to hold on to the strength that I built.
Well, I remember 20 years ago, you were actually doing those pull-ups at the seminar we did where you were doing the super slow pull-ups, but you were inhale, exhale as you moved up through the pull-up. And then, or I think it was a chin-up, whatever. But then we went into, you remember the gymnastics area? I don't know if you remember, but we went over there and you were actually doing goblet squats in the same manner, push-ups in the same manner, where there was two techniques you were showing. You were inhaling small bursts, exhaling small bursts, going down through the push-up, very slow push-up, and then back up, which was even more brutal. But the other thing you did was some type of hypoxic training where you would inhale, exhale, let your air out, hold your breath, and then however many push-ups you could do, and then do your recovery breath, which was more like a rapid inhale, exhale until you recovered.
I mean, million drills like that. It's all good stuff. I'll still get into that now and again. But that's kind of simplified my training pretty much now that I'm at the age I'm in. I mean, I'm not going to build anymore. My days for building are over. So, as you get in a different phases of your career and ages, you start to adapt. And you find that, some things don't work so much anymore. Some things aren't quite as important as they used to be,
Right.
But, I mean, all that was really excellent type of training.
Yeah, and you're talking about it in terms of aging population, but where I am thinking about the application for my business, I run a training studio and we get a lot of athletes. And the benefit is primarily our goal is to keep those athletes healthy. And, any coach, and I'm sure you've observed this, you look at athletes and especially healthy ones, they're the ones who are subjecting themselves to the overtraining because they are healthy. And I'm training someone I was telling Smitty, a military selection school, and he's working on obviously push-ups and pull-ups and running. And most of those guys show up at selection already overtrained and on borderline injured already because of their training. And he is working on push-ups. It's like, it's interesting because if you took him and watched a 30-second set of push-ups, there's almost less metabolic effort being done in that 30 seconds than if he was to do a 20-second hold. There's just, like you said, so much momentum.
Because the goal is to get good at the exercise.
Yeah.
Basically, the goal of weightlifting is to lift as heavy as possible, as easy as possible. You want to make it as easy as possible. When you're doing selection type stuff, you want to make the pull-ups and push-ups as easy as possible. But when you're training for a sport or to get stronger or more hypertrophy or increased strength, you want to do everything as you can to make the exercise as hard as possible. No momentum, good smooth changes of direction. You want to make yourself work as hard as humanly possible. So it's a different paradigm. But to get good at a selection test, you pretty much got to practice the selection test the way they're going to test you. But here's the thing: they don't need to do huge volume to get good at that.
Yeah.
I've taken people through selection, and I had them really only training a couple times a week. They're going to get beat to death during the selection process. But if you try to beat them to death before they even get there, they're going to show up already in an overtrained state.
Yeah.
So, you just get them really good at doing push-ups and pull-ups and runs and sit-ups or whatever else they're going to be involved. I was very proud. I got a guy who was in his 40s. He's the oldest guy ever to get through the FBI HRT fitness test and be selected for HRT, the FBI hostage rescue team. And we kind of cheated a little. He found out exactly what the test was going to be, and we practiced that test as close to test conditions as we could. And he would do that once a week. And then he would just practice basic pull-up, push-up, sit-ups, and running during the week, and lunges. And the guy was super fit, but not overtrained, real fresh. And when he went in there to the selection, the training, he was selected, the oldest guy ever. So,
wow,
nice.
But we didn't try to duplicate, the actual Navy SEAL or Ranger school conditions. They're trying to make you quit, man.
Yeah.
Trying to make you cold, hungry, sleep deprived. They want to see what you got mentally.
Yeah, this kid is training for SEAL school, so he's got a lot to go. But it's
just the cold water, man.
Yeah, I know. Do some cold plunges and then rest up. But it's such a good point that you made, that the exercise should be hard, and this has always been part of the problem with a lot of the higher intensity training gyms now, like CrossFit. Even when you breed the exercise with the sport, you're kind of missing the point of the exercise, in my opinion. And
well, they're trying to make exercise into a sport, basically.
Right.
Like every workout is like selection day,
Yeah.
And I get it. I mean, being a former extremist myself, I could see the appeal,
For
but it's not
sure.
really a good model for training for other sports.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, there's guys that get away with it. You're always going to find an exception to the rule, but the vast majority of guys that have tried to use the CrossFit model for jiu-jitsu usually crash and burn fairly quickly over time.
Yeah.
Same guys that try to use the strongman approach or try to use the Olympic lifting or powerlifting approach,
Yeah.
better off uh, doing something pretty minimal and spend the majority of your time getting those skills down. That's the key. It's a skill based sport. So the majority of your time should be spent working the skill of the sport. And that in itself takes energy. And then, obviously you're going to need to strength train. Now, here's another big thing we didn't talk about: injury prevention. Because strength training will help prevent injury. Can't completely stop injuries from happening. So for that reason, it's really important that people work their feet and calves. I can't believe how many guys do not work any kind of calf flexion or extension. You got to work your calves isometrically or even dynamically. You got to work tibia dorsiflexion. You got to, man. You got to work the front of the shins. You got to work all those muscles running up the front of the top of the feet, the front of the ankles, because ankle injuries run rampant in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Also mobility. You got to work your neck, man. Very important to work your neck. Isometrics are great for that. Unless you have like a MedX, a Nautilus, or hammer strength neck machine, it's kind of hard. Now I've seen that goofy thing that fits in your head that looks like the
Iron
planet
neck.
Saturn or what.
Oh yeah. I got one right here in the studio.
It's okay, but you don't need all this motion.
Hey, they're a sponsor. Don't.
No.
I'm not gonna diss it.
No,
But
no, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
there's a principle in exercise. I'm sure you're well aware of it. That some guys try to do every little muscle function. When you work the primary function of a muscle, all other and get stronger, all other functions are automatically increased in strength. For example, my biceps, right? Flexion. But my biceps also, my bicep brachia, supinate my hand, elevate my upper arm, circumduct my upper arm, help with adduction, help aid the pecs. So, you got supination, you got elevation, circumduction, adduction, as well as flexion. I don't need to work every aspect of the bicep. If I just do curls, all those other functions are automatically strengthened. So some people get carried away. They almost make every session like a rehab thing. It's like, no, you don't need to do that. Most guys don't have enough time for all that, you know. So for sure, neck. If you're just doing front flexion and extension, you're pretty much hitting it all.
Yeah.
You don't even need to do rotation. Absolutely, you should be doing something for external rotation of the shoulders. So, you know,
I agree with you.
or whatever, because man, your shoulders take a beating with Kimuras and Americana on one. Some people call the Americana the key lock. You definitely need to be working that.
Well, that was the first thing I noticed with jiu-jitsu is the lack of tib and calf. I mean, any other sport, it's hard to avoid training your tibs and your calves. And I mean, I've been maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of jiu-jitsu now. And every year we do the Murph Challenge on Memorial Day. And it's insane going out for that first mile run, just how undertrained the calves and the tibs are. And also, we do a ton of rehab work, and that tib anterior, I could probably figure out some connection of why this works, but it is so important in knee health. That tib anterior does wonders for rehab.
I've found the same thing.
Yeah.
Definitely related to knee health. One of the simple ways I've found is you just take a board, right? And you put a strap around the board, like a belt or a strap, and you slide your toes underneath the strap, and then you tibia dorsiflex up against the strap.
Oh, like a little isometric.
Yeah, a little isometric.
Yeah.
Or you lean up against the wall like you're going to do a wall set, but with your feet a little bit closer to the wall. And then you just lift your forefoot up and balance on your heels.
Yeah.
And then you isometrically contract.
I like that.
It's very effective.
Yeah.
And the last thing, everyone's so grip happy, but man, you really overtrain the gripping muscles. Very important to work the finger extensions, wrist extension, finger extension to balance out all that gripping work.
Yeah.
People's fingers and wrists get really wrecked in jiu-jitsu from grab, grab, grab. So rubber band work, either isometrically or dynamically. They actually make things like that. I think Matulis makes a little tool for rock climbers, you know. You can put like these little things around your fingers and open up and hold for time or
Yeah.
a real simple one is you just take a wide mouth mug or a jar and stick your fingers in and isometrically push out and like lift it, hold it for time. Another one is just to hold your body weight like a fingertip push-up position. That's brutal. A lot of guys are not even strong enough to do a fingertip hold.
Yeah.
So all of those things are excellent for helping balance out all that grip work.
Yes.
You know, guys, I mean, you would never think about like working your biceps without working your triceps, right? Both sides of the joint. But everyone's doing grip work, but a lot of guys just don't think about opening and extending the wrist and hands. That will save a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort.
Smitty's wrist flexors have tendonitis from tapping so much, actually. He's got calluses on his fingertips.
When you spar with Smitty, make sure you do plenty of wrist locks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Steve, last time during the podcast, we talked about sort of your daily routine and morning routine. Is there anything that you've added recently into your day as far as maybe supplementation or we talked about mouth taping? Is there
anything about dry brushing last time?
Dry brushing, yeah. Is there anything else you're doing new?
Quite a regimen, you know. Head massage, eye massage, ear massage, tapping. These are all Qi Gong type energetic exercises. Swishing the tongue, swishing called juice of jade with a special kind of swallowing, throat massage, stomach massage, finger massage, massage my balls and my penis for testosterone. There's ways.
You're good with that one.
Yeah, man. Rub one out.
Yeah.
You rub one out in the morning.
Yeah.
You the testosterone levels.
Smitty's had too much plastics in his diet.
Yeah,
he doesn't do that anymore.
OB microwaves plastic. Chews on it for a while. So what else?
Twists and posture exercises. Up, dry brush. One thing I do a lot of now is the red light therapy. I have these lamps, big bulb, far infrared, not near infrared, wrong wavelength, far infrared. I shine one on my thymus gland and one on my lower back, and then I turn around and shine it on my balls and my penis, and then on my upper back and neck. And then I turn sideways, and I put it on my shoulders since that bugs me. Very healing, that light. Very penetrating. That light goes in there pretty deep. So I make sure that I get this red lamp on me every morning.
Well, didn't you say you got that from Lowe's?
Part of the regimen, there's a liver detoxification process. And this is going to sound really gross to people, but I'm telling you, this works. Coffee enemas. And you wonder, like, you know, what grown man would want to put coffee up his ass? But I'm telling you, it really cleans and detoxes the colon and the liver. It gets absorbed up through the lining of the intestines. And coffee is very healing. Not so much drinking it, but the coffee enema is a tried, true, proven method. So I'll do 2 coffee enemas every morning. And it cleans you out like you wouldn't believe. Keeps you lean, keeps you thin, keeps your liver in fantastic shape. A lot of physical problems are caused by chronic constipation. A lot of people are chronically constipated. It can cause all sorts of stuff, arthritis, all sorts of joint aches and pains, back aches, you know, everything.
Wow.
So you want to get cleaned out. And then I'll add an exercise called pulling down, where I pull energy through my body. I imagine it's being pulled down through the top of my head, right out through the bottom of my feet. It's called pulling down. It's a Qi Gong exercise, very ancient, thousands of years old. It's a very, very powerful healing tool.
Wow.
And then, I'll do some ice cold shower at the end of all that. Like, anywhere between 30 seconds to a minute, as cold as I can stand. I don't think there's any real benefit to, building up to these really prolonged cold exposure times. I haven't seen anything to indicate that, it's the initial shock that gives you the benefit.
Right.
And then, was that called the mammalian effect?
Mammalian reflex.
Yeah, the mammalian panic reflex, or the diving reflex. You get that.
Yeah.
I try to suppress that a little bit.
Yep.
Then I'll do various breathing exercises. Of course, I'm going to jiu-jitsu, so I'm doing plenty of mobility warm-ups and stuff, And it's different every day at jiu-jitsu. I have my go-to moves. I make sure I get in a nice deep squat every day. I squat and do prying and move my hips around. I can still squat like a Chinaman.
Nice.
So,
Smitty's got some things to add to his routine now. You've been doing Mountain Dew enemas. That is your problem.
Yeah.
You gotta use coffee.
He was holding that for like 7 minutes.
Yeah,
there.
I wanted to come back.
Yeah.
It gets rid of toxins and your wife's.
Well,
Steve, your main website's Maxwell SC. And that's where people can go and get any of your programs. I mean, you have an arsenal of programs that you've done over the years.
Oh, a bunch of different stuff. And I have a couple of new things in Isometrics. Also, if anyone would like to contact me, they can contact me through the website, or they can use Maxwell1952 at gmail.com. Maxwell1952 at gmail.com if they want to contact me personally. I have a couple openings for some personal training. I do everything via Zoom, so I take people through their first couple workouts, and I have a couple different programs. Depends. Some people don't need a lot of supervision. Some people want to work out with me every week. I have a couple different programs there where I will actually supervise your training and make it pretty much specific to your own personal needs. Obviously, I have a template, but I try to, you have to individualize those templates.
Right.
Age, recovery ability, how active the person is, time, all those factors. So I work with people on that, help them out.
Awesome.
Then I'm really big on, I have some very strict dietary practices that seem to work very well for me as far as keeping me youthful and strong, spry.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, Steve, we truly appreciate you being here today. You're a legend in the industry. You've been my mentor for over 20 years, and every time you come on here, I learn something new. And I hope that someday I'm 10% of your jiu-jitsu ability. But I'm on the path.
How many years has it been, Smitty?
Just one. I'm 1 year in.
Okay,
so,
yeah.
Yep.
So
still can't get out of bottom side control.
I don't know. So
Always got a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Just don't put any pressure on yourself. Go in there and have fun with it. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. Everyone grows at their own rate, So
yeah, that's great advice.
Just kind of compare yourself to yourself, but don't worry about, who's tapping who or who's getting caught or, just go in there and have a good time, man. It's like, you can really take the pressure off. Just think of it as like putting on your pajamas and wrestling with your brothers in the living room floor.
That's awesome.
Well, your brothers aren't trying to pop your shoulder out of the socket, but
that's what tapping's for.
Exactly. You got that right. Thank you, Steve. We really appreciate your time today.
It's been great.
I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely.
Talk to you again soon. Let's not be strangers.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Take care.
Great job, brother. Oh.